Welcome everyone to this video where I'm going to explain what the horizon line and vanishing points are. This will be all you need to understand them, so that you can then confidently move forward and learn more about perspective. I see countless questions that involve both the horizon line and vanishing points, and these are two basic principles that always apply to perspective, so it's important that you know about them. Here in this video I will explain the horizon line first and then move on to vanishing points. The horizon line is your eye level. Everything gets smaller as it gets closer to it because it's getting further away from you. The purpose of drawing in perspective is to represent what we see in reality, in the three-dimensional world, on a piece of paper, a flat two-dimensional surface. It took people a long time to work out how to do this, but thankfully they did, and now we can take advantage of it. So here is a person. Let's have them placed on the ground like that, okay? Now, if the horizon line is our eye level, that must mean that this guy's eye level is here. Here is a person who is stood on a platform above, and their eye level will be higher up. Now there is also another person even higher on another platform. Again, their eye level is higher. It is always a continuous horizontal line that remains at eye level. Now let's view these guys on a side view. They are all looking directly forward at the moment, but let's say that there is this floating cube in front of them. Now it's directly in front of number 2, but number 1 and 3 will tilt their head to look towards it. Does this change their eye level? No, it only changes their line of sight. Their eye level still remains the same because they are at the same level. So now I'm going to replicate what these guys would see as they look at the cube in some modelling software. Number 1 is looking up at the cube. Their eye level is below, which means the horizon line is below. Number 2 had a direct front view of the cube. Their eye level is across the centre, which means the horizon line is across the centre. Number 3 is looking down on the cube. Their eye level is above, and so the horizon line is above. Each of their eye levels are at different levels, and so it affects how they see the object, and it would also affect how they draw the object. So when you create a drawing, you have the ability to freely choose where to place your eye level, which of course is represented by the level of the horizon line, and this can be placed wherever you want on the paper. But before you do that, and before you start drawing, you firstly need to decide on how you want the object you are drawing to appear. Do you want to be looking up at it, looking down on it, or be on the same level as it? These factors need to be considered before you establish the horizon line. Now, I also want to explain something else that might help you understand this more clearly. As artists, we are creating an image of something, representing it as it is seen by the eye. That's why this horizon line is often referred to as the eye level. However, a camera also does the same. It captures what is seen in reality and displays it on a two-dimensional surface, being the photograph. In this modelling software, I am controlling the camera here. I can move it all around and capture this cube on any angle. And so this horizon line here, it could also be referred to as the camera level, but to avoid confusion, I'll keep on referring to it as the eye level and the horizon line. But personally, I much prefer this way of thinking. When I draw, I imagine that I am directing a camera, and what you draw is what is seen through that camera. Also, it's useful to get into this mode of thinking because it will make more sense if you start to get into more complex aspects surrounding perspective, such as lenses where you can change the field of view. All of that is much more advanced. But yeah, perspective is technical, there are fixed rules that apply, and a camera is always going to do its job correctly. So now let's take a look at some photographs and see if we can find the horizon line. I'm starting with this one because whenever you read a book on perspective, they'll likely have an image like this. You've probably guessed already, the horizon line is here. It's an interesting example, but I feel like it can sometimes be confusing because there are no obstructions. There is nothing in this desert, and you're probably not going to be drawing endless planes like this. You know, most of the time you will be drawing objects which do obstruct this line. Take this image for example. Here is a busy city street. There are buildings and objects, but the horizon line still exists, one continuous line. So I'm going to show you some more photos later on in this video, but before I do that, I want to move on to vanishing points. Vanishing points are points of convergence that exist on the horizon line in most cases. A common example that is used to explain this to a beginner is a picture of a train track like this. Notice how these rails continue to head into the distance until they reach the horizon line, where they are then lost from sight. This point where they disappear is the vanishing point. Lines that are parallel will converge to the same vanishing point in perspective, like these train tracks here. You can find the vanishing point by extending some converging lines until they meet. I can also find the horizon line this way because the vanishing points will be on there. Now it's important to understand that only the lines that are parallel to each other will converge to the same vanishing point. Let's go take another look at the cube that our three characters are looking at. We know that the sides of the cube are parallel, so these will converge to a vanishing point in perspective. Number 1 is looking up at the cube, the horizon line is below. Now if I extend the converging lines of the cube, you'll find that they meet at one point on the horizon line. These horizontal lines are parallel, but remain horizontal. Number 2 is looking directly at the cube. It appears as a flat square, but again I can extend these converging lines and they meet at one point. Number 3 is looking down on the cube, and the same applies. These converging lines are extended and meet at one point on the horizon line. Each of these images are in 1 point perspective, as there is only one vanishing point due to the angle of the cube being viewed and the position of our characters as they view it. Now you've likely heard the terms 1, 2 and 3 points perspective. You've probably guessed already that 1 point perspective is a drawing with 1 vanishing point, 2 points perspective is a drawing with 2 vanishing points, and 3 points perspective is a drawing with 3 vanishing points. Before we move on to 2 points perspective, let's take a look at some photographs that are in 1 point perspective. Here is a photo of a long corridor in 1 point perspective. I know that both sides of this corridor are parallel, as is the ceiling and the floor. If I extend these converging lines, they will meet at 1 point, the vanishing point, and I can then find the horizon line as well. And then you can also extend some more converging lines to that vanishing point. This next image is an interior view. We know right away that the horizon line is above the bed, seeing as we can see the top of it. If I extend some of these converging lines, like on the sides of the carpet, they'll meet at the vanishing point on the horizon line. So now let's talk about drawing with 2 vanishing points. When and why do we need another vanishing point? Well, you're not always going to be looking at objects head on. You know, most of the time the objects you are looking at will be on an angle, or you will be viewing the object on an angle. Let's take these characters for instance. They were all looking at the cube, which was directly in front of them. But what if they walked around it and started to see it from other angles? Or alternatively, what if the cube started to rotate itself? Perhaps it's best to show this in the modelling software. Here we have that cube again. Now I can bring myself around and start to see the other side of it. Or like I said, I can rotate the cube itself and start to see the other side of it like that. So this is what these characters would see if that cube rotated around. Number 1 would see it from below, number 2 from the centre, and number 3 from above. And nothing much has changed. The horizon line is still the same, all that has changed is the angle of the cube. It has rotated around, and now it is in 2 points perspective. How do I know this? Well, you can see that we have 2 sets of lines converging now, which means there'll be 2 vanishing points. If I extend these lines until they meet, I can find those vanishing points on the horizon line. I'll do this with each of these cubes here to give you an idea. Notice that the vertical lines still remain vertical in 2 points perspective. Now when we are drawing, we do this in reverse. We start with the horizon line and place some vanishing points which we then use to draw. If I rotate this cube around, you can see how the vanishing points move with it. When the cube is facing us like previously, it's in 1 point perspective. So where you place your vanishing points depends on how you want whatever you are drawing to appear. It's common to place a vanishing point at either side of the page when drawing in 2 points perspective. You don't want them to be too close together because the drawing will become distorted. You'll also find that vanishing points can be off the page. In this case, you are tasked with estimating the direction of your converging lines, trying to aim them towards that vanishing point, or you can use grids and some more technical methods. Again, let's take a look at some photos in 2 points perspective. Here is an image of some buildings, and right away you can see that both sides are converging. Notice how the windows also do this, and as they move further down the building, they begin to level out. Remember that the horizon line is always horizontal, so a useful way to find it is to observe where lines in the image are also horizontal. You can then find some vanishing points. This car is also in 2 points perspective. Observe what's in the image, extend some converging lines until they meet, and find the horizon line. You'll find that most photos and artwork are in 2 points perspective. So now let's take a look at 3 points perspective, and you might have guessed that here we will have 3 vanishing points and 3 sets of lines will be converging. So let's continue to use our 3 characters and look at how they would see the 2 points perspective cube if it was in 3 points perspective. Number 1 would see it like this. Notice that the lines that once were vertical are now converging upwards. Number 2 would see no difference as they are looking at the cube directly in front of them. Number 3 would see the cube like this, similar to how number 1 sees it, except in reverse. This time the vertical lines are converging downwards. All of these lines for this cube are now converging to a vanishing point. This might at first be confusing, but let me explain. If I extend these newly converging vertical lines, they would eventually meet and create the third vanishing point. Now if it's above the object, it's often referred to as the zenith, and if it's below the object, it's referred to as the nadir. This third vanishing point is an exception to the rule, as it doesn't exist on the horizon line. It always exists above or below it, and the vertical lines of the object you are drawing will converge to it. In most cases, this vanishing point will be well off the page, meaning there's only some slight convergence. Let's take a look at some photos in 3 points perspective. Here's another photo of some buildings, this time it's in 3 points perspective. Through observing the image and using what we know already, we can find the horizon line and 2 vanishing points either side. Now the third one will be above, and I can also find this by also extending the converging lines until they meet. This time we have some buildings from above, and you'll often see scenes like this drawn in 3 points perspective. I extend some converging lines, find the vanishing points and the horizon line, and then I can find that third vanishing point that would be below. So that's a few examples. I think they do well to show how the resulting image changes by changing the level of the horizon line and the position of the vanishing points. So now let's take a look at all of these cubes on screen here and observe the differences. You'll notice that 1 point perspective only includes 1 vanishing point and 1 set of lines are converging. 2 points perspective has 2 vanishing points and 2 sets of lines are converging. 3 points perspective has 3 vanishing points and 3 sets of lines are converging. I recommend doing what I just did with any photographs that you find. Find the horizon line, place the vanishing points and observe the resulting image. Also do this with artwork. Find some professional artists' work, break it down and see how they use perspective. You'll really benefit from this.